Okay. I got to weave a bunch of stuff in here together because I know you get mad at me, but I think a lot of you are being played. I don't pretend to be the only honest broker in this business, but it gets frustrating. I'm reading this story about this indictment about the Russians. I'm like, these people are able to afford to fly private. You mean I'm doing like honest work here, and I can't get my NetJet subscription yet, and these people are making $400,000 a month from the Russians. Some of you are being played, and I think you're okay with being played, some of you, because they're telling you what you want to hear. You're on the team, rah-rah. But I think some of you don't even realize you're getting played, and it frustrates me to no end. Let's start with Tucker Carlson and that idiot Darryl Cooper, who he's had on his program. Tucker Carlson is the one who said this guy is trusted, that he's the most honest historian. He's not a trained historian by any stretch of the imagination. He's an amateur idiot. I want to read for you, for example, is something, and this is a common trend. One of the things I'm noticing about these pseudo-intellectual types that are cropping up on the right, particularly on social media, is they write a lot of words and say nothing. It's like Kamala Harris. They're channeling their inner Ibram Kendi or their Kamala Harris. And they write a bunch of words. They use lots of big words. Nobody can understand what they mean. And that's the point. They can have it every way they want to have it with no one really understanding what they mean. It's pseudo-intellectual nonsense. I want to use profanity so bad, and I'm not, but it is horse manure. So this is, so the Darryl Cooper guy goes on Tucker Carlson's show. Tucker Carlson says he's trusted. He's honest. And the guy hates Winston Churchill and actually says that the Nazis are essentially the good guys in World War II and misunderstood, and the winners wrote history, which, by the way, as an aside, when you say history is written by the victors, that's not actually true in most cases, just so you understand. And what actually sets Winston Churchill apart from so much is, as Al Mohler from the Southern Baptist Theological Society points out, he's a big Winston Churchill history buff. Mohler points out what's so unique about Churchill, particularly in the 20th century, is that his enemies praised him as much as his friends. So for a guy like Cooper to come on and actually say Churchill's misunderstood, he's actually the villain, he's not only defying the villains of World War II, saying Churchill was actually like the statesman of the generation, he's defying everybody. And what happens is a lot of these people, they're not really well learned. So I have a seminary professor I dearly love who one time in the middle of class was talking about, Protestants believe in sola scriptura, only scripture. We don't have the magisterium that the Catholic Church has. We read scripture. And my professor stops. He's like, but guys, scripture doesn't only talk to you. It's been talking to other people for 2,000 years as well. Maybe read some of them to figure out what they said scripture said to them, including the Catholics. You can't just read the Bible and say, this is what it must mean to me, therefore this is all it means because we believe in only scripture. No. Augustine read scripture. What did it mean to Augustine? What did it mean to Tertullian? What did it mean to Martin Luther? What did it mean to John Calvin? What did it mean to R.C. Sproul? What did it mean to Tim Keller? Read other people. What I'm finding is a lot of the people who are the pseudo-intellectuals of the left and the right these days are some of the least well-read people in history. And they're like, everything is new again. This Darryl Cooper guy, for example, is relitigating an 80-year-old war without having read the people who wrote the history of the era, many of whom fought in the war. But it's not just that. Let me read you a tweet of his. Those of you who consider yourselves a Christian, listen carefully to this tweet, because a lot of people are supporting this guy, claiming to be Christians. Listen to this. No God in any religious tradition is so consistently brutal and bloodthirsty as Yahweh of the Old Testament. This includes the various war gods and deities of peoples like the Aztec. Christianity has lost influence in part because Christians refuse to reckon with it, instead twisting themselves in knots to justify genocide, rape, incest, etc. Just so we're clear here, it is Christianity 101. Basic introductory Christianity. That the God of the Old Testament, you might want to sit down for this one. You might need to sit down for this. The God of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament. There's a reason when Genesis says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, that John in the New Testament writes, in the beginning, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It is John, the New Testament apostle, friend of Jesus Christ, saying, Jesus is Yahweh. And you don't have to even believe him. At some point, maybe I'll spend some time walking through this one for you. Here's a big, like, mind-blowing one for you. Though you already know this, I want to remind you that the Lord at one time delivered his people out of Egypt, but later destroyed those who do not believe. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. In a similar way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns gave themselves up to sexual immorality and perversion. They served as an example to those who suffer the punishment of eternal fire. Do you know who wrote that? That's Jude, who happened to be the half-brother of Jesus Christ, who says Jesus delivered his people out of Egypt. It is New Testament 101. The half-brother of Jesus Christ says Jesus is Yahweh. Jesus' best friend says Jesus is Yahweh. For this idiot, Darryl Cooper, to come out and say, we have to wrestle with the God of the Old Testament, was this brutal God, that's Jesus Christ. If you think he's a brutal God, you're going to meet him one day, Darryl. Wait till then. See how brutal he is to you. But also, to say that the God of the Old Testament was more brutal than the Aztec God, do you all know that there is this revision, this pagan revisionism, that the Aztec were the poor victims of the Spaniards? The conquest of the Aztec is an example of colonialism being a good thing. The Aztec were horrible, monstrous people who deserved to be eliminated by the Spaniards. No, pay attention to this. There were other tribes, they weren't all Aztec down there. And all of the other tribes in Central America sided with the Spaniards, the invading conquistadors, to eliminate the Aztec. Why would they do that if the Spaniards were the bad guys? Because the Aztec would kidnap their children and torture them, because the Aztec believed that the tears of the crying virgins, boys and girls, would cause the rains to come. And so as they were killing the kids, if the kids weren't crying hard enough, they would begin to grind their fingers and toes and slice open their legs before cutting open their chest and pulling their heart out. That's what the Aztecs did. That's why the Spaniards eliminated them. If you think the God of the Old Testament is brutal, the God of the Aztec wanted them to cut out living children's hearts after grinding their bones to make them cry to bring rain. That's moronic. And people on the right keep elevating these charlatans, these grifters, these frauds, these idiots. There's a huge story out. There's been an indictment of some Russians. These Russians were funding a group called Tenet Media, run by a girl named Lauren Chin and her husband named Liam Donovan, who are Canadians. She was on the Turning Point USA payroll as well of some kind, like Candace Owens. And she apparently knew that the Russians were paying her, and then they were paying other people like Biddy Johnson and Dave Rubin, apparently, Tim Pool, who didn't know. These three, Johnson, Pool, Rubin, they had no idea it was the Russians, although I got to say, apparently one of them was getting $400,000 a month to produce a handful, like less than a half dozen videos a month. $400,000 a month. Apparently had no curiosity as to why they were being paid $400,000 a month to produce videos from somebody in at least Eastern Europe. Turns out it was a Russian propaganda campaign. The Russians pushing anti-Ukraine propaganda into the right, which a lot of people on the right have believed because a lot of trusted voices on the right were telling them that Ukraine was bad, and it turns out it's been the Russians paying them. You know, I gotta say, though, that when I look at the people involved, honestly, Vladimir Putin thought this was the best he could do, is these people. The Chinese, say what you will about them, but the Chinese, they actually pay like high-end influencers, or even the Iranians. The Iranians have embedded people in the Biden administration, for God's sakes. And the Russians are paying like the island of misfit toys on the right. But so many people on the right keep falling for this stuff. Or look at Turning Point USA. They had Lauren Chin on the payroll, anti-Semite. Candace Owens, anti-Semite. They had a bunch of others that they finally had to boot over donor outrage, and yet they keep going on. They've contributed really nothing to the right. I hear all these old people all the time say, oh, Charlie Kirk and Tony Point, they're turning college kids. No, the hell they're not. They're having ragers on college campuses and putting exactly 0 points on the board. There's a huge article in the Daily Mail that the people on the Trump campaign are furious with Charlie Kirk running the ground game because they say they're getting nothing for it. People on the right keep turning to these guys. We want young people involved. I hear that all the time. So we put a bunch of young people involved who don't know what they're doing. They're making a lot of money for not knowing what they're doing. And then some of them actually happen to be unknowingly on the Russian payroll. And then we platform idiots as historians who tell us Winston Churchill's the bad guy. What the hell has happened to people on the right? Here's the thing. Truth actually matters. And we're not going, and this is the point, and people get mad at me and say, Erickson, why do you always beat up on your own side? Why do you beat up on the right? Because we're not going to beat the left when we put the short bus people from the island of misfit toys in charge who want money. They make millions off of losing. I would actually like to beat the left. And the way you actually have to beat the left is to put the good and competent people in charge, not the people who can read a history book and decide Winston Churchill's the bad guy, the Russians are somehow the good guy, and I'm getting all this money every month from someone I don't know, and it just so happens they want me to push out things that align with Vladimir Putin's worldview. I shall ask no questions and maybe delude some people. Come on, we've got to do better. If you want to beat the left, you got to bring your A game. Not the grifters, the charlatans, the frauds, and the idiots on the short bus of campaign season 2024. We're not going to beat the left, but these people, if we lose, are still going to make a pile of money and then convince you someone else is to blame. We got to do better, people. We've got to do better. Or you know what? We're just going to keep losing.